The UK Albums Chart is a list of albums ranked by physical and digital sales and audio streaming in the United Kingdom. It was published for the first time on the 22nd of July 1956 and is compiled every week by the official charts company on Fridays. It is broadcast on BBC Radio 1 and published in Music Week magazine, on the OCC website and in New Charts Plus magazine. To qualify for the official albums chart, the album must be the correct length and price. It must be more than 3 tracks at 20 minutes long and not be classed as a budget album. A budget album costs between 50p and £3.75. Additionally, various artist compilations, which until January 1989 were included in the main album listing, are now listed separately in a compilations chart. Full details of the rules can be found on the OCC website. According to the canon of the OCC, the official British Albums Chart was the Melody Maker chart from the 8th of November 1958 to March 1960, the Record Retailer chart from 1960 to 1969, and the official Albums Chart from 1969 on. In the 1970s, the new album chart was revealed at 12:45 p.m. on Thursdays on BBC Radio 1, and then moved to 6:05 p.m. on Wednesday evenings during the Peter Powell and Bruno Brooks shows. In October 1987, it moved to Monday lunch times during the Gary Davies show, and from April to October 1993 it briefly had its own show from 7 o'clock to 8 p.m. on Sunday evenings, introduced by Lynn Parsons. Since October 1993 it has been included in the official chart show from 4 o'clock to 5:45 p.m. on Fridays. A weekly album chart show was licensed out to BBC Radio 2 and presented by Simon Mayo until it ended on the 2nd of April 2007. Though album sales tend to produce more revenue and, over time, act as a greater measure of an artist's success, this chart receives less media attention than the UK singles chart, because overall sales of an album are more important than its peak position. 2005 saw a record number of artist album sales with 126.2 million sold in the UK. In February 2015, it was announced that, due to the falling sales of albums and rise in popularity of audio streaming, the official albums chart will begin including streaming data from March 2015. Under the revised methodology, the official charts company takes the 12 most streamed tracks from one album, with the top 2 songs being down-weighted in line with the average of the rest. The total of these streams is divided by 1,000 and added to the pure sales of the album. This calculation was designed to ensure that the chart rundown continues to reflect the popularity of the albums themselves, rather than just the performance of 1 or 2 smash hit singles. The final number 1 album on the UK Albums Chart to be based purely on sales alone was Smoke Plus Mirrors by Imagine Dragons. On the 1st of March 2015, In the Lonely Hour by Sam Smith became the first album to top the new Streaming Incorporated official albums chart. Record holders. The most successful artists in the charts depends on the criteria used. As of February 2016, Queen albums have spent more time on the British album charts than any other musical act, followed by the Beatles, Elvis Presley, U2 and ABBA, by most weeks at number 1. However, the Beatles lead with a grand total of 174 weeks, and the most number 1 albums of all with 15. The male solo artist with the most weeks at number 1 is Presley with a total of 65 weeks. weeks. Presley also holds the record for the most #1 albums by a male solo artist and most top 10 albums by any artist. Madonna has the most #1 albums by a female artist in the UK, though this includes the Evita film soundtrack, which was a cast recording and not strictly a Madonna album. Adele is the female solo artist with the most weeks at #1, with a total of 37 weeks. Queen's Greatest Hits is the best-selling album in UK chart history with 6 million copies sold as of February 2014. Previous first-place holder the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is now in third place after being supplanted by Queen and then by ABBA's Gold Greatest Hits. Both albums have sold in excess of 5.1 million copies. The longest-running #1 album, both consecutively and non-consecutively, is the soundtrack of the film South Pacific. It had a consecutive run of 70 weeks from November 1958 to March 1960, and had further runs at the top in 1960 and 1961, making a non-consecutive total of 115 weeks. The youngest artist to top the chart is Neil Reid, whose debut album topped the chart in 1972 when he was only 12 years old. The oldest living artist to top the charts is Vera Lynn at the age of 92 with We'll Meet Again, the very best of Vera Lynn, released in 2009. The album which has spent the most weeks on the charts is Queen's Greatest Hits, with over 700 weeks on its own and a further 211 weeks as part of the Platinum Collection. See List of albums which have spent the most weeks on the UK albums chart for full details. In 1980, Kate Bush became the first British female artist to have a #1 album in the UK with Never Forever, as well as being the first album by any female solo artist to enter the chart at #1. In August 2014, she became the first female artist to have 8 albums in the official UK Top 40 Albums chart simultaneously. She is currently in 4th place for artists having the most simultaneous UK Top 40 albums, behind Elvis Presley and David Bowie, who both tie for the most simultaneous Top 40 albums, and the Beatles, who had 11 in 2009 when remastered versions of their albums were released. The fastest-selling album is 25 by Adele. Released in November 2015, it sold over 800,000 copies in its first week. The X Factor's 2006 runner-up, Ray Quinn, is the only solo artist to top the album chart without ever releasing a single, though Led Zeppelin achieved 8 consecutive #1 albums from 1970 to 1979 without releasing a single in the UK until 1997. The biggest drop from #1 was by Christina Aguilera with her 2010 album, Bionic. The album fell from the top spot in its second week to number 29. The Rolling Stones have reached #1 in the album chart during 5 different decades. ABBA have reached the top spot in 4 consecutive decades, though this was with the same album in the 1990s and the 2000s. For solo artists, Elvis Presley has scored UK #1 albums in 5 different decades. In 1993, Cliff Richard became the first male solo artist to score UK #1 albums in 4 consecutive decades. In 2010, Kylie Minogue became the first female solo artist to have UK #1 albums in 4 consecutive decades. The longest #1 by a group is Simon & Garfunkel's Bridge Over Troubled Water, which was No. 1 for 33 weeks. The longest consecutive #1 by a group was the Beatles' Please Please Me, which held the top spot for a straight 30 weeks. The longest #1 by a male solo artist was Elvis Presley with G.I. Blues, which stayed at the top for 22 weeks. Adele's album 21 has the most weeks at number 1 by a female solo artist with 23 weeks, 11 of which were consecutive. Blossom's self-titled album holds the record for having the lowest one-week sales while at the top of the chart, when it was number 1 the week of the 19th of August 2016 on sales of only 7,948 copies. Debut albums. The fastest-selling debut albums, all-time highest, and highest by a solo female artist, is Susan Boyle with I Dreamed a Dream, which sold 411,820 copies in 2009. By a band is Arctic Monkeys with Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not, which sold 363,735 copies in 2006. By a solo male act is Craig David with Born to Do It, which sold 225,320 copies in 2000. Sam Smith holds the record for most weeks spent in the top 10 by a debut album within the Lonely Hour, with 76, surpassing a record previously held by Emily Sandé and the Beatles.